Hi all, I've got a guide for how to play Blood Death Knight. They're doing very well in terms of performance in Mythic Plus and Raid, and honestly, they're an absolute blast to play. I'll cover everything you should need to get you started in Mythic Plus, raiding, or just solo content. With this guide, you should pretty easily be able to do up to plus 20 keys and normal and heroic raiding. I'll have timestamps down below that you're welcome to jump to if you need something specific. This guide should cover all the basics, but if I miss anything or you have any questions, let me know down in the comments below. For stat priority, you're always going to want to focus on eye level first, then it's going to be mastery, crit, haste, then verse. The reason why mastery is so important for Blood Death Knights is each time you deal damage with Death Strike, which is all the time, you get an absorption shield based on your mastery as well as gaining attack power, so it's really good for our damage and survivability with physical damage. Crit is super helpful because it increases our parry chance, which is a huge part of us surviving, and just more damage. For enchants, for the weapon, we're going to want to do Ruin of the Fallen Crusader. It's by far the best one. For cloak, we're going to want Graceful Avoidance or Homebound Speed, whichever you prefer. Chest is going to be Waking Stats. Legs is going to be Fierce Armor Kit. And then ring is either going to be Devotion of Haste, Devotion of Mastery, Devotion of Crit, kind of whatever you need based off that stat priority I mentioned before. I'd recommend this build for all types of content, so Raid, Mythic Plus, or solo content. It just works really well. A couple things you could change if you wanted to. You could get rid of Rune Tap. What it does is it reduces all damage taken by 20% for 4 seconds. I find this helpful if you're like learning the specialization for the first time, or you're dying on pull a lot. Maybe you're not getting up your bone shield charges fast enough with Morrowind, or you have Dancing Rune Weapon on cooldown pretty often, something like that. But if you want to get rid of it, you totally can, and I'd pick up Bloodworms or another charge of Red Thirst. For this side, I would probably, for Incorporeal weeks, and because I pug a lot, I just think it's super helpful, I'd grab Control Undead for a CC on one of those mobs. Maybe get rid of Unholy Endurance in place of that. And then for Raid, I would get rid of Blinding Sleet for sure, because you don't really need an AoE CC for Raid. I would grab Anti-Magic Zone. It's just super helpful and quite a few different fights. I wanted to quickly cover the basics of how to play Blood Death Knight if you're brand new, so offensive cooldowns, defensive cooldowns, and just what abilities you'll be pressing most of the time. But feel free to skip ahead if you already know the basic abilities and cooldown usage. Blood Death Knight focuses on spending runes to deal damage and to build runic power. They then focus on spending runic power to heal and do damage. Your abilities that you'll be spending runes on are Heart Strike, Death and Decay, and Morrowind. You'll basically be spending your runic power on Death Strike to do quite a bit of your damage, but most importantly, heal yourself. It is your main healing tool. You should always be at least above 5 bone shield charges by using Morrowind, and don't let it fall below that if possible. Try and do your best to stand in your Death and Decay for more damage, more self-healing, and just overall way more survivability. And keep at least 1 charge of Blood Boil on cooldown. Your main offensive cooldowns consist of Dancing Rune Weapon, Abomination Limb, Raise Dead, Tombstone, and Empower Rune Weapon. You should be using all of these on cooldown as much as possible. Always pair Abomination Limb, Raise Dead, and Empower Rune Weapon together. Use Tombstone after Dancing Rune Weapon is used to consume Bone Shield charges and reduce the cooldown on Dancing Rune Weapon. We want as much uptime on a Dancing Rune Weapon as possible, so it's essential to reduce the cooldown as much as we can. Your defensives consist of Dancing Rune Weapon. It's both an offensive and defensive cooldown. It increases our parry chance and more runic power to then heal yourself. We also have Icebound Fortitude, Anti-Magic Shell, which a lot of people refer to as AMS. You just want to make sure you use that before incoming magic damage. You have Vampiric Blood and Lichborn. If you're using the build I gave you, you also have Rune Tap. If you aren't, don't worry about it. Use these on cooldown or when you need them to. You don't have to overlap them unless you need to survive. Just make sure you press them before you die. That's the super important part. Press these before you die. Another huge thing for surviving, and is a big part of our rotation just in general for Blood Death Knight, you should be using Morrowind to get 5 Bone Shield charges as fast as possible at the start of a pull, and try to prioritize that right after grabbing aggro. For our rotation, it really doesn't change a lot between AoE and single target, which is really nice. At the start of the pull, you're going to use Death and Decay, Empower Rune Weapon, Raise Dead, and Abomination Limb. You'll then use Dancing Rune Weapon, Blood Boil, Tombstone, Heart Strike, Death Strike, and Morrowind. Remember to use your big CDs on cooldown, stay above 5 Bone Shield charges at all times, use Death Strike to heal yourself, stand in your Death and Decay, and keep at least 1 charge of Blood Boil on CD. You also don't want to overcap on runic power, so make sure you're throwing in your Death Strikes even if maybe you don't need to heal yourself, just so you're not wasting runic power. A couple tips and tricks I wish I knew when I first started for Blood Death Knight. First one is Dancing Rune Weapon. Actually gives you 5 Bone Shield charges if you guys didn't know that already. Super helpful at the start of pulls. That's why it's a big part of our rotation. But it will give you 5 Bone Shield charges to at least get you the minimum at the start of a pull. Death Grip can actually be used to interrupt certain mobs a second and third time. So obviously we have our main interrupt, which is Mind Freeze, but you can use Death Grip on certain mobs to interrupt their casting again. For a second and third time, we have 2 charges of it with the build that we're using. It's incredibly helpful, and it really helps with pugging, especially if people aren't interrupting stuff, which happens all the time with me. Control Undead, I think I mentioned it before, but Control Undead actually CCs incorporeals, but you can also use it on certain mobs in a dungeon to gain a minion. Super cool. Another helpful tool that I wish I knew when I first started too, was you can actually heal yourself from far away. So obviously most of the time we're healing ourselves with Death Strike, right? But we have to be in melee range, we have to be up close. You can actually use Lichborn. Lichborn, draw upon unholy energy to become undead for 12 seconds, increases leech by 10%, reducing damage taken by 15% and making you immune to charm, fear, and sleep. That's really helpful right there. But what you do here is you draw upon holy energy to become undead, and after that you can actually use Death Coil, which takes runic power obviously, but it fires a blast that does some damage, but it will also heal an undead ally for 56,000 health. So you can use this as a small little heal from range. This actually saved my life a couple times, so super helpful. The last thing I wanted to mention that I wish I knew actually when I first started was Death's Advance. Okay, this is actually incredibly OP cooldown and why Death Knights are really nice in raid. Specifically, for 10 seconds, your movement speed is increased by 35%, so that's nice. It's not that big of a deal. But you cannot be slowed below 100% of normal speed, which is so freaking helpful. But the biggest thing here is you are immune to forced movement effects and knockbacks. Guys, there's so many mobs and bosses in these Mythic Plus dungeons right now, at least this season. The Death's Advance is so freaking helpful to have, and just to not be slowed as well is just super helpful. Last thing I've got for you guys is add-ons I'd recommend getting. I'm sure if you've been playing World of Warcraft for a long time, you already know about all these, probably every single one. But if you're new, and there's a lot of new players in the game, these will be really helpful, okay? So first one's going to be Details. It shows you damage, total healing, interrupts, damage taken, deaths, just a bunch of helpful information on your screen. It's on CurseForge, and I'll leave links in the description below to all of these. You can just use that. The next one's going to be Weak Auras. You can see it in the middle of my screen here, but it'll show your Bone Shield charges you have in the middle of your screen. It'll show runes, runic power, cooldown usage when your cooldowns are coming back up, buffs that you have. It's so freaking essential and getting better in WoW. I'd recommend it to anybody. Next one's gonna be Deadly Boss Mods. It basically yells at you when you're standing and shit. It helps with basic mechanics. It shows when mechanics are gonna happen here on boss fights, regular mobs, so you know what to prepare for, especially if you're tanking. It's so freaking helpful, you guys. That'll do it for the Blood Death Knight guide. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you found this video helpful and enjoyed playing Blood DK. It's one of my favorite tanks to play by quite a bit. If you need or want more of an advanced guide, I always suggest checking out Wowhead. They do an amazing job. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you want to see more guides like this for WoW or other MMORPGs, and I will catch you in the next video.